curse of
afraid people
objects.
will put an X on them because if they take a piece of your hair or something that belongs to you, you put an X on you. That's baloney. The Lord takes care of all this nonsense. But when a spiritist or somebody that's involved with even spirits in some form or other gives you anything and you bring it to your home, the spirits have got access to your home openly at all times.
Among the accursed objects in the Newkirk's collection is a deadly ring that is claimed to kill anyone who wears it.
A doll that changed into a horrifying ghoulish nightmare, almost as if it actually aged. A teddy bear that sent a man to the hospital, a lifelike mannequin that may be more than just an eerily realistic sculpture. These are cursed dolls that even Ed and Lorraine Warren would have been terrified of. This first story was making its rounds on the internet for a while, the doll that aged. So it all started with a regular baby girl doll that a young girl played with every day, but as time passed and the girl grew up, she played with the doll less and less, until eventually it was tucked away in the attic and forgotten about for over a decade. Sounds like the beginning of like Toy Story, but this is kind of like the horror version. So fast forward to when the parents decide to clear out the attic, they're looking for the old doll, but when they finally find it, they're completely shocked and horrified to find that the doll, which had been left untouched for years, now looked like this. Just kind of different from how they remembered it. I mean, in what world would anyone ever purchase something as horrific looking as that for their young daughter? Unless, you know, you're me, because that's a reaction I would just love to see on Christmas morning. The once sweet baby doll now had this ghoulish, shriveled appearance. I mean, it looks worse than the Crypt Keeper. Horrified, the parents quickly got rid of the doll. They didn't burn it in a fire like you'd probably expect though. Instead, they took the time to actually sell this monstrosity. And managed to. Next we have mourning dolls, and that's not like early mourning, I mean the death kind of mourning. Mourning dolls were a thing in the Victorian era, and back in those days life was incredibly tough, especially with the rampant diseases that led to high mortality rates a lot of the time in younger people. To cope with the loss of young loved ones, some families created these unique dolls known as Victorian mourning dolls. These were actually made for the parents, keepsakes designed to honor and remember their deceased daughters or sons. They were usually made from materials like wax or porcelain and dressed in black clothing to symbolize mourning and death. And even more depressing, they were handcrafted to look just like the youngsters who just croaked, with great attention to detail, and they'd usually put them on display where they used to play. Good lord. I get the idea of creating this tangible thing that's meant to keep their spirit alive, I guess, but man, that is morbid. To say that some of these things must have been cursed would be an understatement. Oh, mannequins, don't they just make you want to leave the store immediately? A lot of the time they're just faceless figures now, but they used to be a lot creepier when they were made to look more like people with like eyes and noses and lips. Well, no mannequin hits that unsettling uncanny valley thing more than La Pascualita, an eerie mannequin that's become a must-see attraction in Mexico. This mannequin is known for its very lifelike appearance, and some people believe it might be more than just a display piece. The story goes that La Pascualita was modeled after the daughter of the bridal shop's original owner. She tragically died on her wedding day after being bitten by a poisonous insect. Heartbroken, the mother commissioned the mannequin in her likeness as a way to remember her. But there's always been this rumor or urban legend that La Pascualita isn't a mannequin at all, but a preserved corpse. Some claim they've seen her move or even heard her whisper. Plus the thing is just so eerily lifelike, especially for a mannequin. I mean, just look at that hand. Ugh. This story went viral when a TikToker named Jessie V did a video on it, but the ordeal had actually been filmed for TV before that. So this is the story of Mr. Ted, a haunted teddy bear that sent a man to the hospital. Mr. Ted once belonged to a psychic medium named Debbie Davis who claimed that the bear had some unsettling vibes. According to her, Mr. Ted had been known to cause nausea in people and even make growling sounds. So, you know, what do you do with a growling bear that makes you vomit? Well, you take it to a haunted castle, of course, because why not? Bolsover Castle is famous for being one of the most haunted castles in England. A team of 3 volunteers then agreed to spend the night in the castle with Mr. Ted just to see if there was any truth to the story. They set up their experiment with Mr. Ted sitting on a chair next to them as they tried to get some sleep. Paranormal expert Joe Lockwood was on hand, observing from a nearby room. Well, around 3 a.m., the team lost connection with a camera, and during this weird period, one of the producers working on the TV experiment suddenly fell ill and had to go to the hospital. After this, the bear was buried in a secret location about 30 miles from its owner's home in Manchester. Fingers crossed it doesn't crawl out of its grave to growl and upset any other innocent stomachs ever again. Okiku is a haunted doll from Japan with a really tragic backstory. In 1918, a young man named Daikichi Suzuki bought a doll for his young sister, Okiku. She fell in love with it right away and took it everywhere she went. But sadly, Okiku caught the yellow fever and died just a year later, still clutching the doll in her arms. Her family built an altar for her and placed the doll there to honor her memory. But people started noticing that the doll's hair, which had been neatly styled, seemed to grow. They saw split ends and longer strands, and along with this, the family experienced odd happenings in their home. There'd be flickering lights, loud bangs, and whispers, especially around significant dates, like Okiku's birthday or the anniversary of her death. In 1938, the family moved, but decided to leave the doll behind, feeling it belonged near their daughter's resting place. They gave it to a local temple where it remains to this day, and yes, the hair supposedly continues to grow.
Starting us off at number 10, the toy monkey. So it goes without saying that almost everything that is a notable part of the Conjuring series is also a real artifact that the Warrens found along the way. One of these such artifacts, who made an appearance in both The Conjuring and the spin-off Annabelle Comes Home, is the toy monkey. However, if it wasn't already obvious, it's not something to be played with. As Ed tells the reporters in the Conjuring movie, everything you see here is either haunted, cursed, or been used in some kind of ritualistic practice. Nothing is a toy, not even the toy monkey. So what exactly makes this monkey so scary in real life? Well, allegedly, it is possessed by a terrifying demon who enjoys stalking its victims before eventually killing them. So yeah, not a very nice monkey it seems. Although nothing you'll find in this museum is terribly friendly. Coming in at number 9, a vampire coffin. As far as creepy looking things go, I have to say this is not one of the scariest looking on the list, but of course, things are not always what they appear. This coffin found at the Warrens Museum is not just called the vampire coffin because of the slightly goofy looking Count Dracula face on the top, but because it was allegedly actually used by a modern day vampire. Now, I'm not saying that this is fictional, but I will say that the details surrounding this are rather few. There is no file stating how modern this modern vampire was or how it came to be in their possession, but I mean, it's definitely very intriguing. My only question is, where is this so-called vampire now? Was it killed or is it roaming free? Should we be nervous that a bloodthirsty monster could be on the loose, or was it more of a Twilight vampire situation? I guess we will never know. Coming in at number 8, the famous music box. If you have seen The Conjuring, which by the way, if you haven't, you really should, then you will definitely recognize this next item here. In the film version of the story, the youngest child of the family, April, finds an antique music box in the house and uses it to communicate with the spirit of a young boy named Rory, who was supposedly killed by his mother, Bathsheba, in the 1800s. Now, of course, there are definitely larger things at play throughout the film, but at the end of it, viewers see Ed place the haunted music box inside of the room of artifacts, where it suddenly opens and begins to play its tinny music. Now, in real life, it didn't quite happen like that, but the real music box is safely tucked away in the Warrens Museum. However, legend has it that while it really does contain an evil spirit, it was not properly contained, and so some believe the demon could escape at any moment. Coming in at number 7, tombstones. When it comes to items involved in a satanic ritual, I am sure that the Warrens managed to corner that market. I mean, are there other haunted museums? Absolutely, but theirs is really the one that started it all. One of these allegedly satanically involved items you can find hiding about are a series of tombstones that the Warrens claim were used in a dark occult ritual by those who work on the darker side of the paranormal. However, what makes these tombstones especially creepy is that they reportedly belong to rather young people. And so the Warrens had reason to believe that the young people were not only used as a sacrifice, but then their tombstones were used to finalize the ritual. So, just all around very dark and evil stuff. Coming in at number 6, a brick. It's not all Hollywood-based sensations inside the museum. In fact, one of their most prized and feared possessions looks about as plain as you could imagine. It's a brick, like from a house. But of course, this is no ordinary brick. It's in an occult museum after all. This brick in particular was from the Borley Rectory, a now famous building that was demolished in 1944 after it was badly damaged in a fire. But what made it such a sensation was that prior to the 1939 fire, it had long been rumored to be the most haunted building in all of the United Kingdom, which is a pretty tall order considering how many allegedly haunted buildings span across the UK. Allegedly, the night of the fire, there were over 2,000 reports of paranormal activity, including floating bricks thought to have been possessed by a poltergeist. So, if rumors are true, that would make this brick probably the most terrifying brick ever. Which, I mean, I don't know how much competition it really has there, but still, it's a demonic brick. It's terrifying no matter what.
Starting off our list today, we have the silver Pilen arrow of the Stockholm subway station in Sweden. A shiny ghost train said to haunt the tunnels and pick up unsuspecting passengers at random. The silver Pilen has been known to stop at random stations at random times and to draw passengers into its train's cars in order to take them to a place called Kimlinge, a real but abandoned subway station known as the Station of the Dead. It is said that those that arrive there are either trapped there for life or that they are stuck there for at least a decade before they are able to somehow find their way back up to the world above. Those who have seen the silver Pilen arrow have described it in one of two ways. One, that when the train comes to a stop in front of them, its doors open and its carriages are eerily and completely empty. And two, which is the more creepy one in my opinion, when the doors open, they do so to reveal the ghostly souls of passengers who have been lost to the Station of the Dead.
This next ghostly train seemed to be a dark omen of death. The Phantom Train of Medicine Hat. It's a pretty spooky story. So in June of 1908, a train set out from Medicine Hat, Canadian Pacific Railway Station, bound for Dunmore. On board were engineer Bob Tuhey and fireman Gus Day. Everything was pretty normal until, to their horror, they saw the light of an oncoming train. Now this was a single track, so all they could do was try to stop, but they knew there was no way they were going to stop in time before the train barreled into them. Just as they thought they were about to crash though, they didn't. Somehow the train moved off the tracks and passed along beside them. They watched as people on board on the other train waved to them before it vanished into the night. Tuhey and Day were completely shaken and didn't even discuss what they'd just seen, each thinking that they'd lost their minds. Tuhey was so shaken up that he went and saw a fortune teller who told him that he was going to die within a month. Tuhey decided to take some time off of work. A couple weeks later, Day was on the job, this time with a man named Jay Nicholson, and they both witnessed the Phantom Train again, passing them by as the ghostly passengers waved. Then, on July 8th of 1908, Jay Nicholson boarded the same train he'd operated with Day a few nights earlier. Along with him was fireman H. Thompson. Gus Day had been assigned to yard service, so fortunately he wasn't on the train. Now, as the train approached the location where the Phantom locomotive had been spotted before, another train appeared around the bend. But this time it wasn't just a ghost train, it was an actual train. And at the throttle of this oncoming train was none other than Bob Toohey, who had finally returned to work after his time off being a little rattled. And this time the trains did crash, and both engineers, Toohey and Nicholson, died on impact along with 9 passengers. Bob Toohey had died just like the fortune teller had predicted.
Now, while this next train won't necessarily take you to an evil location, it might bring you to a bit of a dark place mentally, or make you quit your job. Either one. It's the Phantom Train of Marshall Pass, located in Colorado. The story goes that one night an engineer named Nelson Edwards was maneuvering his train along the tracks in winter when all of a sudden he heard the sound of another train creeping up behind his own, and he saw the train's light behind him. He sped up as the train behind him raced faster and faster and closer until he got to a point on the tracks that required him to stop. He took his chances and hit the brakes, and to his surprise, nothing happened. In fact, the train behind him vanished right into thin air. It was as though it never existed. When Edwards went home that night, he had an eerie feeling, a feeling which only grew after receiving an anonymous note recounting the details of a similar crash that took place just a few years prior. He retired the next day.
The London Underground is full of ghostly urban legends. There are tons of ghosts in supposedly haunted stations, but the Kennington Loop is said to be one of the eeriest sections of the London subway. You do not want to be on the train when it goes through the Kennington Loop. Or if you're like me, then you definitely do, but the point is, there are a lot of spooky stories about this section of the subway. So the Northern Line is a lengthy underground route that runs all the way from the northern outskirts to the southern areas of London. Along this line is the infamous Loop. It's the turnaround point for trains and is completely off limits to passengers. Train operators tend to get pretty spooked here though. First of all, it's a tight loop, so it's a bit tricky to navigate, and there are tons of reports from train drivers hearing strange voices echoing through the empty train. Some drivers will even claim to hear the sound of carriage doors slamming open and shut all by themselves. The town of Florala, Alabama, and parts of Florida were once stalked by a massive alligator. Nicknamed Two-Toed Tom, was often described as a 14-foot red-eyed hell demon, missing 2 toes on his left foot after getting caught in a trap. Now, stories of the gator eating livestock as well as farmers themselves started spreading in the 1920s. He was said to be impervious to bullets, and one famous tale even goes that a farmer named Pap Hines found one of his mules torn apart by what looked to have been a large alligator. So he and his sons filled 15 syrup buckets with dynamite, tossing it into the nearby pond to try and get rid of whatever creature they figured had crawled out of there to feed. Well, instead of killing the beast, they just enraged it. Out of the pond came the massive hellish gator known as Two-Toed Tom, who brutally attacked the farmer's granddaughter, eating her whole. Hines fired at the creature, but to no avail.
Ojai, California is said to be home to an incredibly terrifying demon with an incredibly heartbreaking past. Legend says that in 1948, a large bushfire broke out and destroyed everything in its path. Forests, grasslands, and even a few homes, one of which belonged to the father of who is now known as the Charman. When the fire engulfed the father and son's home, it claimed the life of the Charman's dad and badly burned the Charman himself. Due to the devastation of the fire, it was weeks before anyone was able to reach the home and provide support to any of the survivors of the fire. It was in this time that the Charman is said to have gone mad and to have given up his soul to some kind of demonic force. Apparently, when rescuers arrived, the Charman's father had been strung up by his feet, and the man's burnt skin had been almost entirely removed from his body. To this day, the Charman is said to haunt the Creek Road Bridge in the town, also known as Charman Bridge now. But it's a bit more than local legend, because apparently the local police station routinely receives calls about disturbances related to the Charman in the area he's believed to haunt, which makes the whole thing just a bit more real and a whole heck of a lot more terrifying.
Starting us off at number 10 is the death van. During the mid to late 90s, Dr. Jack Kevorkian became a notorious figure after being convicted for second-degree homicide for his role in the voluntary euthanasia of over 130 patients. Through the trial, his reputation earned him the nickname Dr. Death, and he ended up being sentenced to 10 years for his deeds. Now, despite the negative narrative, the doctor always fought back, claiming to be aiding the terminally ill end their lives on their own terms, and had set up an old 1968 Volkswagen van to get the job done. Now, whether you believe he was innocent or not, the fact of the matter is that at least 130 people died in this van, so naturally it has developed quite the reputation as a haunted object. So much so that at one point in time it was being sold on eBay for nearly $4,000. However, nowadays you can find it at the eternally haunted Zach Baggins Museum, where the ghosts of those who died are said to wander the museum, spooking visitors at all hours of the day. Coming up next at number 9 is Wheelie. Some say it's a stuffed dog, while others say it looks more like a sheep, but either way, it's an old, creepy, haunted toy from the 19th century that can be found in the Prince Edward Island Museum in Canada. Nicknamed Wheelie due to the creaky wheels the stuffed animal sits on top of, this nearly 200-year-old toy was found lying inside the walls of the Yeo House while construction was underway. According to staff, the disfigured sheep dog toy was simply lying on the ground inside the walls, and so they decided to keep it and put it out on display for their visitors, which would be all well and fine, except for the fact that it very well may have been hidden in a wall for a reason. Apparently, Wheelie is known to wander around all by himself, and is often found hiding in a different spot than where he was left the night before, which, if horror movies have taught me anything, is never a good sign. Coming in at number 8, hair. Now, I will admit this is not a single object that can be found in a haunted museum, but it is definitely an exhibit that will make your skin crawl. Inside the Avanos Hair Museum in Turkey, yes, you heard that right, is literally a floor-to-ceiling cave-like room with countless little snippets of hair surrounding you at every angle. In fact, to be exact, there are 16,000 different hair samples adorning the walls. I'm sure you're wondering how such a museum began in the first place. Well, the common folklore is that a local potter once asked a dying friend to leave him a snippet of her hair to remember her by. The friend obliged and cut a small piece of her locks for the potter. From there, the potter placed the gift in his shop, and apparently this inspired visitors who began following in her footsteps and gifting locks to be displayed in his shop along with the original, until eventually the shop was overrun by hair. And don't worry, if you want in on the fun, or creepiness depending on your feeling about hair, guests are encouraged to leave behind a little sample themselves. Just ask the staff for some scissors and your wishes will be granted. Coming in at number 7, the dark mirror. Found in the Museum of the Paranormal and Occult, this dark mirror is said to show you much more than you will ever want to see. The Mobile Museum obtained this cursed mirror from the original owner, who claimed to have purchased it while attending a psychic fair in the Columbus area. Now, there are lots of alleged cursed mirrors out there, some said to be haunted by demons who escape in the night, torturing whoever possesses the cursed glass, which, don't get me wrong, is definitely terrifying. However, this particular object has more of an eerie, foreboding quality that is sure to send anyone who looks into it into a spiral. According to the museum, those that dare gaze into the cursed mirror claim to be struck with very upsetting visions. Some even reported ghastly sightings, such as their own corpse staring back at them. Coming in at number 6 is Einstein's brain. In the famous Medical Muir Museum in Philadelphia is none other than the brain of world-famous theoretical physicist Albert Einstein. Or at least parts of it are there. And almost as peculiar as having sections of his brain preserved in glass slides and displayed is the story of how the genius brain wound up at the museum in the first place. Apparently, after he died in 1955, pathologist Thomas Harvey was the one to perform his autopsy. But unbeknownst to the family, he decided to remove Einstein's brain for preservation in the hopes that scientists of the future could study it to determine what made Einstein so intelligent. Eventually, after much reluctance, Einstein's son agreed to allow the brain to be kept under one very strict condition, that it be used for scientific research. Now, with permission from his next of kin, Harvey went forward, slicing the brain into 240 pieces, making sure to preserve each piece very carefully. Over the next few decades, Harvey would send bits and pieces to researchers upon request, and eventually donated the rest to this very museum it resides in today.
Number 10. Dybbuk Box. In Jewish folklore, a Dybbuk is an evil spirit. Supposedly, someone accidentally summoned the demon while using a homemade Ouija board, but managed to trap it inside the wine cabinet. The Dybbuk Box came to light in 2001 when Kevin Mannis purchased it and started having terrible nightmares. He then decided to gift the cabinet to his mother, who suffered a stroke the very day she received it. Not just this, but every person who ever owned that wine cabinet has reported experiencing horrible events. The last owner of the cabinet, Jason Haxton, found out the box possesses a spirit of a malicious Jewish creature called a Dybbuk, who has the ability to haunt and possess the living. Jason not only had nightmares but also developed a strange skin disease and began coughing up blood. At that point, Jason contacted his local rabbis and sealed the Dybbuk back in the box. Jason later, wanting nothing to do with the box, gave the cabinet to Zach to display it in his museum. You actually may have heard of this box before because in 2018, fans of rapper Post Malone claimed that his spat of bad luck was caused by his contact with the cabinet. Number 9. Charles Manson's cremated ashes. Charles Manson was a criminal who created a cult called the Manson family. It was active in California in the late 1960s and early 1970s. Now, the group consisted of approximately 100 followers who had lived an unconventional lifestyle and frequently used psychoactive substances. Now, the members of the cult believed that he was Jesus Christ and followed everything he did. Now, some members committed a series of 9 deaths at 4 locations in July and August of 1969. In 1971, Manson was convicted of first-degree homicide and conspiracy to commit homicide for the deaths of 7 people, including the film actress Sharon Tate. When Charles Manson died, his body was cremated, and some of his followers actually took fragments of his ashes to keep as a memento. This led to such creations as the Ryan Almighty blood paintings of Manson, in which the eyes were filled in with Charles's own cremains. Painted in Ryan's own blood, the artistry has to be appreciated, but the morbidness of the painting with the cremated ashes included makes for a unique piece, to say the least. This very painting is on display at the museum along with other Charles Manson memorabilia, including a prison-worn outfit, Manson's own TV, and even more ashes in a display case along with Manson's dentures. Number 8. Love Ranch Bed. Zach acquired the bed and bedroom furniture of Bunny Ranch and Love Ranch owner Dennis Hoff, which eerily includes the mattress Dennis died on. Dennis died in that room of a heart attack on October 16, 2018. He was 72 years old. Now, this just so happens to be the same mattress Lamar Odom was on when he overdosed 3 years prior in October 2015. Safe to say, a lot of bad things have happened on that mattress. Zach says they never swapped out the mattress in the Love Ranch room, and now folks at the legal Nevada brothel believe it's cursed. Zach said that he was told that the bed was cursed, so of course he wanted to add it to his collection. Number 7. Dr. Jack Kevorkian's van. Jack Kevorkian publicly championed a terminal patient's right to die by physician-assisted suicide, embodied in his quote, "Dying is not a crime." It said that he assisted at least 130 patients in ending their lives. For this, he was convicted of homicide in 1999 and was often portrayed in the media with the name of Dr. Death. Jack, who died in 2011, lived out of a van for periods of his life and used it to carry out some of his crimes. Zach found this van and paid $32,500 for the rusty 1968 Volkswagen van, which has been parked in storage at the American Jewelry and Loan Pawn Shop on 8 Mile in Detroit. Now it sits at his museum for all to see. Number 6. Demon House Staircase. From a very intriguing standalone documentary of the same name, the Demon House was an investigation undertaken by Zach and the team at a home in Indiana, where the family claimed that numerous members of the family had been possessed by a spirit. The local police department and even social services within the local area were convinced that the house was some way haunted. From footsteps in the corridor to full-on body possession, the Demon House creeped Zach and the team out more than anything we've witnessed on the show before. Now, Zach actually purchased the home for himself for investigations back in 2014 and used it to film the documentary before bulldozing it entirely in 2016, taking pieces of it, including the staircase, back to the haunted museum.
No better way to start off than with a cursed doll, right? Okiku is said to be one of the most haunted dolls in Japan. In 1918, a young man named Akichi Suzuki saw the doll sitting in a shop in Sapporo and decided to buy it for his younger sister, Okiku, who fell in love with the doll instantly, taking it with her wherever she went, and she named the doll Okiku after herself. But just 1 year later, Okiku caught the yellow fever and she died, still grasping the doll. The family built an altar for her where they placed the doll, and soon things would start to get strange. First, they began to notice that Okiku the doll's hair looked different than it did before. It looked like it had grown, and the hair that had been all neat and tidy now had split ends. On top of that, strange things would happen throughout the house. Lights would flicker, they'd hear loud bangs and whispers, especially close to important dates, like Okiku's birthday or the anniversary of her death. In 1938, the family moved to a different district, but they didn't take the doll with them, believing that it was important for it to remain close to their daughter's resting place. So they gifted the doll to a local temple, where it still remains to this day, and that hair is still said to grow and gets regular trimmings.
Next up, we have the Iceman, which, cursed aside, you most likely wouldn't want in your home anyways, because it's literally the mummified remains of a 5,000-year-old man that were found in the Alps in 1991 and are believed to have caused the death of all those involved in its extraction. In the 13 years that followed the discovery and removal of the man perfectly preserved in ice, who had likely died after being hit in the back of the head with an arrow from a remote area in the mountains, one by one, all of the people involved in the discovery died. I guess they should have let the sleeping Iceman lie. One of the researchers involved in the discovery, Hen, was killed in a car crash on his way to give a speech about the artifact, and another, Fritz, an experienced climber, died shortly after in an avalanche. He was the only member of his climbing party to be struck. In the years that followed, the other researchers died of brain tumors, complications from multiple sclerosis, freezing to death in a freak blizzard, and a blood disorder. Today, the Iceman rests in a refrigerated room in the South Tyrol Archaeological Museum in Italy, which, lucky for me, is nowhere near Canada.
Next, we have a haunted doll from Australia, Letta. And good lord, of course this thing is haunted. How would it not be? That is not easy on the eyes. The doll first started making the rounds when a man named Kerry Walton began showing up on various talk shows with the doll that he named Letta, full name Letta Me Out, because he believed there was some sort of spiritual force trapped within the doll. Walton had been exploring an abandoned building in Wagga Wagga one day in 1972 when he came across the abomination, and for some reason was like, this thing belongs at my house. So he took it home, and the rest is history. He started noticing scuff marks on the floor that didn't belong to him right around the time he welcomed Letta into his home. He'd even noticed the doll move slightly on its own right in front of him. Other people would claim to feel this uncomfortable unease around Letta. There are even stories about the doll causing people to faint.
Our first number is 666 666 6666. 666, the classic scary number. Now for years, people all over the world have been receiving creepy messages from the phone numbers 666 or the 1666 whole number, you know what I mean. Some people believe these calls come from the devil, and in many cases, the calls do not show up on the phone bill and they can't be traced back to anyone. An online user posted an experience they had with the number, saying, "We were in a car going home one night when our friend received a call on his cell phone from the 666 number. He never picked up the phone, and we even joked about how the devil was calling him from hell. Several minutes later, he received a voicemail. Now this was the oddest voicemail I had ever heard. It sounded like a hollow voice and there was a lot of static in the background. We were only able to determine a couple of words, but it scared the crap out of us. And for some reason, the message was erased several hours later and there was no sign of it on his bill. Yeah, that definitely sounds haunted, and I think I'm gonna go block that number right now. Next on our list is 407-734-0254. Now this contact is associated with a clown who lives in Naples, Florida. It is one of the famous ghost numbers that people avoid calling. It said when you call the number, it connects you to Wrinkles, the clown. Now Wrinkles will then appear and intimidate you and your friends. He wears a red and white polka dotted suit, balloons, and a morose face mask. His phone number is plastered on stickers scattered throughout the Naples area. Now the Wrinkles the Clown craze dates back to a 2014 video. Caught on CCTV's grainy black and white camera, a scary video of Wrinkles is captured. At first, many people thought it was a joke, but it wasn't. It has since gone incredibly viral. In the video, a girl is seen sleeping on a trundle bed. The drawer beneath her slowly opens, seemingly on her own, to reveal a clown in a polka dotted suit. He stands up to his full height and looms over the sleeping child. Luckily for her, she doesn't wake up and isn't permanently scarred. Turns out Wrinkles was not an intruder. He was brought to the house on purpose by parents looking to mess with their daughter. For Wrinkles, scaring people is a profitable side hustle. Wrinkles the Clown is most commonly summoned as a desperate or mean disciplinary tactic. Parents pay $150 an hour for Wrinkles to scare their misbehaving kids. There was even a documentary about him, but he's never revealed his true identity. Due to that, I do not trust him, and if I ever see Wrinkles in real life, I think I would cry. Number 8. 999-9999. Now this is one of the numbers you should not call in Thailand. Legend has it that if you wish to die after midnight, dial that number. The story goes when the person answers the phone, you make a wish, and that once you make a wish, you want to meet your maker, and a bizarre incident happens and you are no more. Now there is some controversy regarding this number, as reports say it was set up to promote a movie, but it's not clear if the curse was made up by the movie or inspired the movie. The eerie number is believed to still be haunted 22 years after the film's debut, and personally, I wouldn't even jinx it. Whether it's legend or real, I'm just gonna stay away. Next on our list is 1-000-000-0000. This strange number is linked to Asian people and is believed to be one of the most haunted phone numbers. It's believed to be a call from the dead. It's said if you see this call, your deceased relative is trying to reach you. People who received the call reported that a male voice instructed them to ask 15 people to call him back, and failure to do so would result in their death. Now this just sounds like some early 2000s chainmail that would have scared me when I was 10, so I'm not too sure I believe it. Next on our list is 2020-2020. People who were children in the 1970s claim that in the UK there was a mysterious number that could be dialed for free in a payphone. When the call was picked up, you would hear a woman's voice saying over and over, help me, Susie's dying." Now why or where this came from is unknown, but a lot of people have experiences with it. An online user said, back in 1975 when I was 9 years old, some of the kids I hung around with insisted we all pile into the nearest phone box to hear a spooky message. You would hear a woman speaking in a curiously monotone voice saying, help me, Susie's dying, over and over, and sometimes she said, help me, Susie's drowning, always in the same monotonous voice. Another user said, "I have a vivid memory of the strange phone message. I was with 3 other girls from school and we were messing around in a phone box calling random numbers. One of the girls said she knew a number you could call to hear a spooky message. When she called this number, we all heard the Susie's dying message. Needless to say, we were all freaked out by this." Yes, that is extremely weird and very unsettling.
Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have Anna Baker's wedding dress. In 1836, a man named Elias Baker purchased a mansion in Altoona, Pennsylvania and moved his small family in. Elias's oldest daughter was named Anna, and when she fell in love with a steel worker, things took a dark turn. Anna's father didn't want her dating this man, but she kept doing it in secret. The story goes that Anna and the man planned a secret wedding and were going to elope. Unfortunately, Elias found out and freaked out. He apparently purchased the steel mill that the man worked for and then forced him to have to move to an entirely different city so as to prevent him from being able to continue seeing Anna. Anna, of course, was furious with her father, and I'm sure this was only made worse by his decision to offer other men to her, to which she of course declined because that's just weird. Anna instead locked herself in a room with her wedding dress that she never got to wear. Anna unfortunately never married after that and spent the rest of her life being terribly upset about the whole incident. After her death, it is said that her anger and despair ended up going into the wedding dress. Members of the Baker family reported seeing the dress in different places around the house, despite no one moving it themselves. Some have even reported seeing Anna's spirit dressed in the gown around the house as well. In our number 9 spot today, we have the Golden Eagle. This car was a 1964 Dodge 330 limited edition, and it has been blamed for the death of around 14 people, which, like, how do we even let it get that out of control? It is said that the car started out as a police car originally, but there were 3 officers assigned to this car who all ended up taking their lives and other people's lives in horrible ways. Not in the car, but still super weird that this all seemed to happen after they had been using the cars for work. Because of this strange correlation, it ended up being sold off to another man. Throughout the 80s and 90s, it is said that because of the rumored cursed car, it became a point of interest for vandals. People began vandalizing the car only to meet their own untimely fates, which were all met in strange ways. For example, it was said that one vandal died from being struck by lightning. It is said that the curse is so strong that one person decided to merely touch the car and it sent him into madness as he went on to commit atrocious crimes after that I cannot even detail here on YouTube. The car now belongs to Wendy Allen, who supposedly collects and decorates haunted cars for a living, so it seems as though it's finally found its home, far, far, far away from anyone else. In our number 8 spot today, we have the Blarney Stone. For hundreds of years, the Blarney Stone has resided within Blarney Castle, which is near Cork, Ireland. The stone is a piece of limestone, and legend says that those who give the stone a smooch will then be given the gift of the gab. This little smooch can bestow the power of being able to talk your way out of any situation, which would be incredibly useful, but there are those who always try to indulge in too much of a good thing. The issues start when you attempt to take a piece of the stone, no matter how small, away from its home. Those who don't follow the rules and take the stone end up being cursed with bad luck. Every year the castle receives parcels from greedy tourists who tried their luck at stealing portions of the stone. These parcels are returned with the intention of lifting the curse of misfortune. It is said that once the stone is returned, the curse will be lifted, which is most definitely good news. So I guess the moral of this curse, however, is to not be greedy and to just follow the rules. In our number 7 spot today, we have the Terracotta Army. The Terracotta Army was discovered in China, and it is a massive piece of funerary art that is thought to be one of the most massive archaeological finds of modern times. It truly is incredible, and it's something that's been attracting tourists from all over the world since its discovery, but for those who did the discovering, well, things haven't been going so well. In 1974, there were 7 farmers who happened to stumble upon this huge discovery, and you would think that this would come with some kind of a reward, but instead, things have been going terribly for them. Soon after the discovery, the government claimed their farmland. After this, their homes were demolished in order to make way for the exhibition halls and gift shops that were to come. They didn't just get nothing for the discovery, they ended up losing because of it. This is exactly why many people believe that perhaps with the unearthing of this huge
huge piece of art, they also dug up some sort of curse that was buried long ago. In our number 6 spot today, we have the Myrtle's Plantation Mirror. Myrtle's Plantation is located in St. Francisville, Louisiana, and it is said to be one of the most haunted places in the entire world, which seems like that would make a lot of sense. One of the reasons for this spooky reputation is because of a mirror that resides inside of it. It is said that this mirror holds the spirit of Sarah Woodruff and 2 of her children. Legend goes that a woman named Chloe was a slave at the plantation, and she drew up a sort of plan to get revenge on the owners of it, Sarah and her husband. Chloe baked a cake full of poison for them, but in the end, the rest of the family, except for the husband, ended up consuming the poisonous cake. When they passed away, it is said that their spirits went into the only mirror that was uncovered at the time, thus this haunted mirror was born. People who have since visited the plantation have claimed to see the family in the reflection, as well as handprints on the glass, despite the continuous polishing.
The Twilight franchise is full of awkward performances and poorly written dialogue, but the scariest thing to come out of it may be a doll that was used on set. In Breaking Dawn Part 2, Bella and Edward's daughter, Renesmee, was a doll. She wasn't supposed to be a doll in the story, they just decided it would be easiest to use a doll on set instead of a real human being, which I mean, sure, but easier doesn't always make something better. And in the case of this movie, the prop was downright nightmarish. If I had a daughter that came out looking like that, it wouldn't be good. Anyway, apparently this prop doll doesn't just look creepy, it is creepy. By that I mean the cast said they thought the thing was downright haunted and hated being around it. So much so that it was nicknamed Chucky Smee. It now sits in the Forever Twilight collection in Forks, Washington, which displays a whole bunch of props and wardrobe from the movies. Staff will say they see the doll moving around on her own, often being found in different positions in the glass case. Staff will see her standing up straight one day, only to come in the next day with her sitting or in some weird position.
Next on our list today, we have the doll in a painting, the intersection where creepy artwork and cursed dolls meet. In 1972, with a rapidly approaching deadline, artist William Stoneham decided to use a poem that his wife had written him as the inspiration for his next painting, this painting, which he called The Hands Resist Him. It was a physical reminder of William's upbringing and his time spent with his adoptive parents. What he saw as beautiful seriously creeped out the public. The young man in the painting, representative of William, stands next to a dead-eyed doll, holding something that appears to have frayed wires coming out of the top. And in the windows behind the two, hands can be seen reaching out towards them, pressed against the glass. The painting was eventually sold to John Marley at an event attended by Henry Seldes and William Stoneham himself. All 3 men died shortly after. In 2000, the painting became popular once more when its owners listed it for sale on eBay, claiming that their daughter had seen the man and doll in the painting fight, and that at one point the family had even witnessed the man go missing from the painting after he climbed right off the canvas in the middle of the night. The family selling the painting was also looking for someone to bless their home after the piece was gone. I don't blame them, it's really creepy to look at.
Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have the statue. This statue, or bust, is said to have been made by a man named William who enjoyed making these sorts of things out of clay. Unfortunately, however, legend goes that this specific statue was made on the same day that William was crushed to death during a tragic work accident. A co-worker of his who showed up to work the following day found that this statue was still there, so he took it home with him. For a while he kept the statue hidden, but when he took it out to display it, things started to go awry. It started with just a heavy and uninviting feeling, but soon things escalated. He began to hear doors slamming on their own, only to go and find them wide open. If anything was placed next to the statue, the next time he would find it completely shattered, and at one point he found the statue in a position that he never placed it in. He finally had the last straw when he saw a dark, shadowy figure, or a sort of mist, moving around near where he placed the statue. After this, he was so spooked he had a friend list the item for him on eBay because he just simply needed to get rid of it. In our number 9 spot today, we have Uluru Rock. Uluru Rock is a large sandstone formation that is located in the southern part of the
Northern Territory in Australia. It is sometimes known as Ayers Rock, but regardless of what it is called, this area is sacred for the people indigenous to the land. This is part of the reason that those who visit the rock are asked to not take anything from the site. Despite this, people of course still choose to smuggle pieces of the rock out of the area and home with them. Other than the bad karma and just in general feeling like a bad person for doing the one thing you're asked not to do, as it turns out this rock may hold a more sinister secret. Those who have stolen rocks from the Uluru have experienced things like extremely bad luck, severe illness, and sometimes even the death of those they love. The curse these rocks hold is seemingly so bad that it is very common for the company that runs the tours of the formation to receive letters of apology that contain the stolen rocks. Apparently these letters come so often, at least one a day is expected. Maybe this is a weird coincidence, but it seems to be happening a little too often for that to be the explanation. In our number 8 spot today we have the beds. Back in 1986, couple Deborah and Alan Tolman moved into a new home with their children in Wisconsin. The following year they bought a second-hand set of bunk beds for their kids for $100, but as it would turn out, they bought much more than they had originally bargained for. When they brought the bunk beds into their home, they clearly must have brought something else along with it. It started when they began to see strange shapes in their home, and they would hear disembodied voices that, despite how hard they tried, they could not find the source of. They found themselves fighting with clocks and radios that turned on by themselves, they would find furniture that had moved seemingly all by itself, and sometimes they'd even see an apparition of an old woman. In the end, they not only threw the beds in the landfill, but they also moved from the home just to be safe. As far as we know, the beds remained in the landfill, but who's to say for sure? In our number 7 spot today we have the Crying Children paintings. These paintings were a series created by an Italian painter who was known as Giovanni Bregolin, but his name was really Bruno Amarillo. Bruno was born in Venice in 1911 and fought in World War II, which ended up being the inspiration for a lot of his paintings. During his time in the war, he saw a lot of suffering, and this is where he got the idea for the series of Crying Children paintings. After the paintings were sold, there began to be reports of fires in all of the places where the paintings were held. While this could have just been a strange coincidence, the weirdest part is that the paintings always remained intact while everything else around them was burned. This quickly became the most talked about thing and was on the front of every newspaper, and the paintings quickly gained the nickname Diablo. It caused the paintings to end up being replicated and mass produced, but none of the replicas hold quite the same powers as the originals. In our number 6 spot today we have the Goddess statue. The Goddess of Death statue is also known as the Woman from the Lem. This artifact was made out of limestone and it was created somewhere around 3500 BC and was found in Cyprus in 1878. Over the years it has belonged to many different families who all have been ruined and dismantled by death. After the first 6 years of ownership, all 7 members of the first family died. It then moved on to a second owner, and after 4 years death began to come to him and his family as well. There was then a long period where it was unclaimed, but once the third family finally got a hold of it, several members of that family began to die as well. The third family ended up turning it over to the Royal Scottish Museum because it is of course an ancient relic, but legend goes that the museum curator who initially took care of it died within a year of receiving it. So maybe the curse lives on. In our number 5 spot today we have the goblet. This is an item that was found in a museum, but it was a museum of specifically haunted things, so I feel like it still counts. This goblet is said to have been used for rituals of necromancy, which poses a few questions for me personally. What did they put in it and presumably drink out of it? Holy water? Wine? Blood? All the above? Who knows? Either way, here's the real kicker. This goblet was of course for sale on eBay because why not? And the seller was claiming that it has an amazing energy to it. Okay. What kind of energy? Well, they said that some find it strangely positive, but that many perceive it as negative and malignant. Alright. Don't think I'll be bidding on that auction, to be perfectly honest. In our number 4 spot today we have the Surrey ghost car. On December 11th, 2002, a call came into the Surrey Police Department. The caller reported that they had just seen a car lose control and run off the road and then presumably crash. It was of course an emergency call, but not necessarily anything out of the ordinary. That was until authorities got to the location and realized that they couldn't find any evidence of a crash. They kept searching and ended up finding a maroon colored car that was nose down in a ditch nearby,
nearby, but this car was covered in so much undergrowth that it must have been here for months. This meant that somehow this crash went undetected for 5 months, and worst of all, so did the body that lay nearby. Using dental records, they were able to identify the body as a man who had been wanted for robbery since July of that year. It is said that the sighting of the car leaving the road was a ghostly replay of the events that had taken place 5 months prior. In our number 3 spot today, we have doorknobs. To be honest, I wasn't expecting to ever hear about haunted doorknobs, but this might just be a thing that really does exist. These doorknobs were listed on eBay, and the seller explained that they were once the knobs seen on the doors at an asylum, which truly lands on the list of creepiest places in the world. Considering everything that is said to have gone on at places like these, it truly doesn't surprise me one bit. We're looking at you, lobotomies and other horrific mental health treatments of the past. These doorknobs must have quite literally opened the door to some terrifying things that I'm sure many of us would prefer to not even think about. According to the eBay listing, the asylum that they came from after it was abandoned is said to have had strange whispers, occurrences, and horrifying noises coming from it. This is all to say that maybe that trip to Home Depot is better than buying antique. Just this one time. In our number 2 spot today, we have the Nightmare Doll. Haunted dolls like Annabelle and even Robert get a lot of hype, but they certainly aren't the only dolls with stories of curses and hauntings behind them. This Nightmare Doll was listed for sale on eBay, and according to the seller, the doll is possessed by a Dybbuk, which is a malicious demon or entity. The seller of the doll is actually someone who apparently specializes in selling these sort of paranormal items that no one wants anymore. The seller explained that the owner of the doll bought it at an antique shop, and while they did tell her about what the doll held, she didn't know what the word meant, so she took it anyways. Soon after purchasing it, she realized that anyone who came into contact with the doll was then plagued with terrifying nightmares and occurrences of these sort of shadow people. She only could handle this all for a couple of months before she handed the doll over for it to be sold and moved far, far away from her. In our number 1 spot today, we have the carving. This is a carving that was sold on eBay in 2013, which the sellers claimed had been in their family for over 60 years. It was originally found by the seller's grandparents in the attic of their home. This was back in the 1950s, and when it was found, the grandparents asked the original owners of the home where it had come from. They explained that it was a gift from a prisoner who is said to have carved it. The seller explained in their post that, quote, anyone who comes in contact with it seems to feel strange or creeped out by it. The statue mostly didn't cause too much harm, that was, until the seller tried to put it on display in their home. Once it was taken out of an old box and placed in a cabinet, strange occurrences began. They said that, quote, I began to experience the television turning off and on, lights coming on in rooms no one was in, the kids' toys coming on in the middle of the night in their room at 3 a.m. At the end of the day, despite the troubles this person had with the statue, they still ended up selling it for $85. Not a bad deal. Get rid of a demon and gain some cash for it.
In a museum in the town of Quesnel, British Columbia, there's a doll named Mandy that likes to follow people with her eyes, and these are not the kind of eyes you want to have following you around a room. Just take a look at this monstrosity. Yeah, keep it the hell away from me, please. Even without all the stories about it, I'd still be creeped out having this thing around. Mandy was gifted to the Quesnel Museum and Archives in 1991. The doll is now about a century old, and the donor had received it from her grandmother. It had been locked in a trunk for years, but when she took it out, she felt that something was just off about the doll. Wonder why. She decided to donate it to the museum. When Mandy arrived, the staff photographed her to add her to the collection and left her in the lab overnight. The next morning, they found the lab in complete disarray, as if someone had thrown a big temper tantrum. Another strange event occurred later, when a stuffed lamb given to Mandy to keep her company was found outside of her locked case. Visitors also report odd experiences. One person from Calgary tried to videotape Mandy but couldn't get the camera to work, though it worked fine everywhere else in the museum. Another visitor from Surrey returned home to find her house had been broken into, with only one item missing, being a porcelain doll. A local reporter was developing photos of Mandy in the basement lab. He heard footsteps upstairs, and then his contact sheet jammed in the machine, something that had never happened to him before. And of course, a lot of museum visitors will swear that Mandy's eyes follow them as they move around.
Next up, we've got Harold, who was purchased by a young man attending a flea market in 2003. As soon as he spotted the doll, the young man knew he had to have it. He went back and forth with the old man selling it, but eventually the two settled on $20 for the dilapidated Harold. The young man began to walk away with his purchase, but the old man chased after him, insisting that the young man know the origins of the doll that was now in his possession. The old man told of how the doll, Harold, had been given to his own son as a gift, but that his son died shortly after. After his son's death, the old man kept Harold in his room, but whenever he walked by, he would hear the sounds of singing and laughter, even though there was no one there. Eventually, the old man became sick of the taunting and he tried to burn the doll, but Harold wasn't having it. He wouldn't burn. Despite the old man's warnings, the young man took the doll home. That night, he began having severe migraines, something he had never experienced in the past. And then, 2 days later, his cat died. After that, he began hearing voices and laughter, just as the old man claimed to have heard himself. Despite what the young man was experiencing, he couldn't give up that connection with Harold, and he decided to keep the doll, but he locked him away in a suitcase for safe measure, where he remains to this day, just waiting for the moment someone lets him out.
Next up, we have what is described as a possessed demon doll currently up for auction on eBay. And at the time of this video coming out, you only have till tomorrow to place your bids, so get on there and get your dollars in. The seller described how the doll, whose name is Valerie, has scratched her and her husband on more than one occasion. She says in the item description that she keeps her away and hidden in the water heater closet, and that if the doll is left out or if she dares to look into its eyes, there are consequences. Saying if you just glance at her vessel, some type of mark will show up on your body. The seller also notes that the doll will be bound and blindfolded when shipped out, which is for the seller's protection during packaging and for your protection as you open the package. So it sounds like an easy sell to me. Ditch the tickle me Elmo that you have to tickle and snag this possessed demon doll that will scratch you instead.
Next up, we have the Victorian doll, which was purchased alongside two others by Debbie and Cameron Merrick, and which was also featured on the This Morning show. You see, one day Debbie and Cameron made the decision to purchase 3 old Victorian dolls for the low price of just $5 and their sanity. Shortly after they purchased the dolls and moved them into their home, strange things started to happen. The fire alarm would go off constantly and continuously, despite no smoke or fire being present in the home, and Cameron began waking up with tiny scratches all over his legs. One day, one of the doll's necklaces disappeared, and Debbie and Cameron came to the conclusion that this doll must be possessed. After speaking about their experiences online, the pair, along with their possessed Victorian doll, were invited to the morning show. The couple spoke about their experiences since purchasing the doll when all of a sudden the rocking chair next to them where the doll was sitting began to move on live TV. After the incident, the pair were positive that the thing was possessed, and so they sold it to a paranormal investigator by the name of Lee Steer, who claims that shortly after purchasing the doll, the lights in his home began acting up. His paintings began swinging on their hooks and strange scratches were appearing on his arm. He also claimed that at one point the doll possessed a random word app that shows the user words at random to tell Steer that her name was Samantha and that she hated men. Probably not the best thing to be keeping in a bachelor pad.
This story comes to us from Reddit user ApprehensiveCost806, who asked the fine people of Reddit to help them with a doll they believed might have been haunted. So they wrote, "I like to go charity shopping a lot. You can find amazing things there for even better prices. In my most recent shop, I found a really cute doll. I saw it and I knew I wanted it. It was so cute. For context, I've always been 50-50 when it comes to the supernatural, but since I've got this doll, I've noticed whistling from behind me whenever the doll has been in the same room. I play it off as someone outside whistling, but something else has happened. I was showering and usually leave the door slightly open if I'm home alone, as my dogs always find some way to misbehave. This way I can keep a better eye on them. My dogs started barking uncontrollably, and I thought it was someone outside. I couldn't stop them from barking. I ended my shower to check the door. When I got out, I noticed my dog nervously barking at my bedroom door, where the doll is. I decided to go to my room and check it out. Usually my dogs willingly run into my room and get comfy on my bed or chew what they can find. They wouldn't. They both stood there barking. I'm well aware that animals are deemed to be more sensitive towards the supernatural, and I'm aware of my dog's behavior enough to know that this was unusual.
Next up, we've got Ruby, who currently travels with the Traveling Museum of Paranormal and Occult, but once lived with a young woman who long ago got very sick. The young woman loved Ruby. She was her most favorite possession, and so when the young woman died, Ruby was passed down through generations of the woman's family. Many family members who kept Ruby would put her in a box because they found the doll to be just a tad bit creepy. Those who decided to brave the Ruby storm and keep the doll out on a shelf or chair reported having often heard strange noises coming from the room in which the doll was being kept. Many have also said that they have heard Ruby walking around and also experienced nausea and headaches while in the doll's presence. Those who visit the doll at the museum today are drawn to Ruby, and almost half of the people who walk past her are compelled to take her in their arms and rock her back and forth as though they are trying to soothe her. When they are made aware of their actions, they're shocked, appearing as though they have no recollection of how the doll had gotten into their arms in the first place. Other visitors have gone home with photos of the doll on their phone, even though they swear they have no memory of taking any.
Alright, next up we have Violet the Haunted Doll, who was purchased by Reddit user Abandoned Explorer 21, who stumbled on the doll at a yard sale. The doll was offered for free with a note claiming it was haunted. The user asked the owner why she believed the doll was haunted. The owner said that she had bought the doll at a thrift store for her daughter, who named it Violet. Strange things began happening almost immediately though. The owner heard her daughter arguing with someone she claimed was Violet. One day while her daughter was out, the owner heard a girl's voice coming from the daughter's room. She found Violet in the center of the room and moved her to the bed. As she walked away though, she saw the fridge magnets had been arranged to spell hi. Then a music box in the living room started to play before she heard the door to her daughter's room slam on its own. So terrified, she waited outside until her husband returned, and when they re-entered the house, they saw Violet on the coffee table. The husband tossed Violet into the shed, where she stayed until the yard sale. So the Redditor decided to take Violet home. After all that, for almost a month, nothing unusual happened, but then one night the user felt someone sit down on the foot of the bed, but nobody was there. A few days later, while making a sandwich, the user heard a girl's voice whisper, "Hey." This was followed by giggling from the bedroom, where Violet had mysteriously moved to the bed. Now wanting to investigate, the Redditor bought an EMF detector and spirit box. The EMF detector showed high readings near Violet. And after 2 weeks of static on the spirit box, the user finally heard hi and get the thing. Went back to the seller, asked him if there was anything that had been attached to the doll. The seller said maybe it was referencing the music box, and gave it to them. During a spirit box session, a girl's laugh and a man's voice saying devil ended up coming through. So now fearing, the whole devil thing, she ended up throwing Violet into the backyard, and the next day found that she had moved closer to the house. So finally the user put her in a storage unit, never taking her out again after that.
And finally, we have Letta. In 1972, a man named Kerry Walton was visiting his hometown in Australia for his grandfather's funeral and decided to check something off his bucket list. There was an old abandoned building in the town that for years he was too afraid to even go near, but on this visit, he felt compelled to finally face his fears and enter the home. While searching around the home, he found an old marionette doll underneath the porch, and he felt the urge to take it home with him. Feeling a strange energy coming from the doll, Walton decided to bring it to a psychic, where he learned of its origin. It had been made 200 years prior to Walton finding the doll by a Romanian woman for her son who had drowned. Oh, and it also housed his soul. The hair on the marionette's head was real, it was that of the boy's, and underneath its removable scalp was the likeness of a human brain. After the visit to the psychic, Walton began hearing noises coming from the doll that he could faintly make out to be the screams of a young man saying, "Let me out." He named the doll Letta and brought it to his antique shop, but the doll was not for sale. Walton liked Letta a lot because he believed that the marionette was bringing him good fortune, But the doll was not without its quirks. Whenever Letta was taken outside, it would rain, and when Letta was brought into a room, pictures would fall off the walls. Dogs would also get aggressive while in the presence of the doll and try to attack those around them, and many people also reported feelings of inexplicable fear and sadness whenever they got close to it. Walton has also said that the doll will often change positions when left alone and emit a pulse when held, as though it is somehow still alive.
In our number 5 spot today, we have tap shoes. These tap shoes were listed on eBay and they are cute as can be. They're black shiny ones with a red bow to tie them together. They look recital ready, but apparently they haven't been used in a long time, and the reason behind it all is chilling. Legend goes that these shoes once belonged to a little girl who loved to dance. At some point, the shoes were retired and she would go on to meet an untimely fate. The shoes ended up being placed with other old memento items and put in a closet and sort of forgotten about. The shoes, as well as the other items with it, ended up being part of an estate sale years later, but the spirit of the person who passed may have already had some other ideas about what they wanted to happen to the shoes. The seller of the shoes reported that there were mysterious happenings surrounding the shoes as they were clearing out their late aunt's house, the person who was the owner of the shoes. They explained that there were mysterious knocking sounds coming from inside of the closet, almost as if the shoes were tapping by themselves. Also, as it turns out, the house had quite a gruesome history that included killings, so if not the aunt's ghost, perhaps there's another one lurking somewhere in there. In our number 4 spot today, we have the dark mirror. This mirror now resides with the Traveling Museum of the Paranormal and the Occult, but prior to that, this mirror was received from the owner who had purchased it from a psychic fair. It is believed that this mirror was created sometime around the 1820s or 30s, and it is actually quite beautiful to look at despite the sinister things it seems to hold. The owner who gave it to the museum explained that every time they peered into the mirror, they saw these extremely upsetting things while looking into the dark mirror's reflection. The museum has said that since they added the mirror to their collection, there have been guests who have also reported the same kind of things. Guests have claimed to see things reflected back at them like sightings of their own corpse. In our number 3 spot today, we have the water jug. Okay, estate sales are weird places. There are weird things there, some quirky items, but this has got to be one of the strangest on a whole bunch of different levels. It's a decorative drinking jug, but it's being held in a miniature cart that's being pulled by a porcelain donkey. I truly could not make that item up, nor could I make up the fact that this kitschy item is also apparently haunted. The seller of this item spoke about how he grew up with the item around as it was always displayed at his grandmother's house and that she always kept it full of water. This was all fine and dandy until after she passed away and he was taking care of the estate and he bumped into it. How was this jug filled with water when no one was there to fill it? He thought that perhaps it was just old leftover water and he just ignored it, but the same thing seemed to happen repeatedly. And it wasn't even like the water level was staying the same. It would increase, seemingly all on its own. The seller decided that this was not an item that they wanted to hold on to and decided it would be best to pass on to someone who is ready to take on this mysterious, strange object. In our number 2 spot today, we have Letta the doll. Before we really dive into this one, can we just acknowledge how all cursed dolls look like they would be a cursed doll? I mean, like Annabelle, Robert, they both totally look like dolls that would be holding a secret, scary curse. And this doll, Letta, is just another one that we can add to that list. Letta is a doll that is said to be around 200 years old and is extremely cursed. This doll is called Letta for short, as its full name is Letta Me Out. Really clever. The doll was originally found underneath a house, which definitely feels like the origin story of a haunted doll. The creepy discovery came 47 years ago. Letta still lives with the man who found him. The hauntings of Letta include things like the doll walking around on its own at night, the owners finding objects around the house that have been moved into odd places. Some people have even seen Letta move right in front of their own eyes, and the owner also reports finding little doll-sized scuff marks around the home as well. It is said that this doll once belonged to someone who passed away while holding it, thus their spirit became trapped inside of the doll. Apparently one day in an interview about Letta, as the interviewer was asking questions about the person who passed, the doll began to move in her lap. Yeah, no thank you.
Letta has his own Instagram and Facebook page in case you want to hear more about all of the creepiness surrounding this cursed doll. In our number 1 spot today we have the mask. This metal mask resembles the face of a monkey. It's definitely already a little strange looking, but the story is even more interesting. According to the seller of this item, they explained that they acquired this mask in Thailand, but not before they experienced a supernatural battle where a witch used spells to bind the spirit of a jinn to the mask, trapping it in. Since then, the mask is said to be full of supernatural powers, some of which could bring benefits, but it takes a whole pile of work. This mask is said to have the ability to fend off vampires as well as potentially bring riches to its owner, but it needs some things in return. The entity in the mask needs regular offerings of food and drink, and it also requires the owner to meditate in front of it for 20 minutes 3 times a day. Talk about high maintenance. If a person refuses to do these things while in possession of the mask, it is said that a cruel fate awaits them. I mean, what do you expect when you anger an ancient spirit?
Next on our list is 090-4444-4444. The mysterious phone number from Japan has been dubbed Sadako's number, and it is feared as a cursed line with potentially disastrous consequences. According to the Japanese, Sadako is a legendary villain in the scariest Japanese legends. Sadako was a ghost of a psychic who was thrown in a well and used the number to haunt people. Now, the 4 digits of the number hold special significance in Japanese culture due to their dual homophones, one meaning she or death. While dialing the infamous number, first you might be met with strange sounds or silence, but it's what may follow that will send chills down your spine. Rumor has it those who are unfortunate enough to call the line will suffer a horrific accident or even death within 7 days. Now, don't get too eager to call it though, as the brand that operates the number put on their website that the number is no longer in use and it will not be assigned to anyone either, because the owner would then constantly receive spam calls from people wanting to contact Sadako. Next on our list is 408-634-2806. A lot of rumors surround this number. The freakiest witch insists that it's a so-called red room number. Now, for those of you who don't know, a red room number is a number which can allegedly be used to track down the physical location of the people who either call the number themselves or answer the calls received from it. Then the person behind this number will kidnap the other person, bring them to a red room, and end their lives. Now, this sounds like something completely out of a movie. Now, these alleged sessions are said to be broadcast live over the deep web, which honestly doesn't surprise me. It said if you call this number, you will hear a static-filled automated recording of someone saying various jumbled things like all's well that ends well. Now, I'm not going to be the one to test it out though, so if you do, let me know how it goes. Well, that is if you survive. Number 3. The red number. The red number is from Pakistan, and it caused a stir in 2007 when people received alarming emails and text messages about the contact. You know when you get a phone call and it's usually in black or white text? Well, not these numbers, they were in red. It was said that the contact had a high frequency range that damaged brain nerves and even caused death. Now, it was called a red number not only because of the physical red color of the number, but also to represent blood, because you would die if you called/received a call from this number. People were warned not to receive or look at the red digits. The contact was a national discussion, forcing the Pakistani government to form a commission of inquiry. Next on our list is 1-216-333-1810. Now, this mysterious number has been making headlines and sending chills down people's spines since a USB stick with an MP3 file called 2332 was discovered in a toilet after a 9 Inch Nails concert. At first, the file contained only the sounds of crickets chirping, but upon closer inspection, it was revealed to be more than what it appeared. After undergoing spectrograph analysis, it turned out that hidden within the recording was a phone number. Those brave enough to dial the digits were confronted with a harrowing call between an anguished mother and her daughter, who had locked herself inside a storage closet and feared for her life due to gunshots and shouting echoing in the background. Whether this was conceived as part of an elaborate marketing ploy or is genuinely real remains unknown. Regardless, it scares me. And last on our list is 0888-888-888. The first owner of the number was the CEO of the issuing company, Mobitel himself, Vladimir Granshnov. Reportedly, he died of cancer in 2001, and according to Mail Online, his cancer was rumored to have been caused caused by a business rival using radioactive poisoning on him. The number was taken up by a mafia named Konstantin Dimitrov, who died in 2003, where he'd gone to inspect his $500 million worth drug empire. Reportedly, he was gunned down by Russian mafias who were jealous of him. It's also said that he had the phone with him when he died. The third man who took up the number was businessman Konstantin Dishlev, who died in 2005 in Bulgaria's capital Sofia, reportedly outside an Indian restaurant. It was reported that he was also running a large drug operation. The case into his death is still open to this day. Now, does this really have to do with the number itself? I'm not too sure, but ever since 2005 the number has been suspended, and whoever calls it hears the same message outside network coverage, which I think is the best thing to do.
Next up, a lot of dolls on this list. We've got the real life Annabelle. If you're not sure what I mean by that, Annabelle is a horror movie about a haunted doll named Annabelle, who is directly based off a real life haunted doll also named Annabelle. The real life doll was an innocent looking Raggedy Ann doll, and she was gifted to a nurse living in Hartford, Connecticut. After receiving the doll, she and her roommate, a fellow nurse, began noticing incredibly strange occurrences around their home. The doll would mysteriously appear and disappear from rooms around the house and uncross and cross her legs when no one was looking. And then, one day the nurses came home to find "Help Me" written on a piece of parchment paper and crayons scattered across the floor. And soon after, they witnessed Annabelle moving firsthand right in front of their eyes, lifting her arms up at the dining room table. They then took the doll to a medium who believed that it was inhabited by the spirit of a young, harmless woman. But shortly after that, one of the nurse's fiancés visited their home. And that was proved wrong. He had a nightmare about Annabelle before waking up in a fuss and throwing the doll across the room in anger, when all of a sudden 4 large scratches appeared across the man's body. The women then took the doll to a priest who instructed them to seek the assistance of paranormal experts Ed and Lorraine Warren, who believed the doll to be possessed by a demon. Annabelle was then taken from the nurse's home in the pair's car. They actually had a car crash on the way to bring it to the Occult Museum in Connecticut, where it now resides in a sealed box.
A cursed jewelry box. Don't hear about that every day. Apparently this jewelry box has the spirit of an old school bus driver named Wendy trapped inside it, and if that sounds enticing to you, then good news, because it's currently up for auction on eBay. In the description, the seller Amanda gives a lot of detail about the box, where she got it, and how she discovered that it was haunted. So Amanda had stumbled on the box at an estate sale and was just drawn to it for some reason. She bought it and then did an investigation. She started receiving messages through EVP and a spirit box. The words Wendy, school, happy, love, and peace came through. She ended up going back to the estate sale to learn more. She started chatting up the organizers, and she discovered that the sale had been run by the children of a woman named Wendy, who had recently passed away. Wendy, a retired school bus driver who also worked as a substitute teacher and field trip chaperone, was deeply involved in her community, and it turned out that the jewelry box had been a gift from her husband. The music box is said to be now a vessel for the spirit of Wendy. All I hear is that there's a ghost in the box, so, what are you waiting for? Place your bids.
Next up, we've got the Hope Diamond, which honestly is anything but hopeful. The curse of the Hope Diamond, considered to be the world's most cursed gemstone, started all the way back in the 17th century. It was stolen from a Hindu statue by a man named Jean-Baptiste Tavernier. After the theft, one of the temple's priests put a curse on the artifact that would affect anyone who laid claim to it. Shortly after, Tavernier died of an intense fever. The diamond later came into the possession of King Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, both of whom were guillotined shortly after. During the French Revolution, the diamond was stolen by a French jeweler whose son killed him for the diamond and then killed himself after having the diamond in his possession for too long. After that, the diamond went missing for many years. It resurfaced in the 1900s. When it resurfaced in the 1900s, one of its owners drove their car off a cliff and another watched their son and daughter die, and then their husband leave them for another woman. The diamond was then sold to a jeweler who then donated it to the Smithsonian after his house burnt down and he got into a life-threatening car accident, which is where it remains to this day.
A doll of shadows is not the kind of thing that comes to mind when you think creepy doll. Yeah, it doesn't look like a normal doll that just happens to have a dark backstory. This thing is right out of a nightmare. In fact, it even has real human bones built into it and a human tooth. Not only does it look terrifying though, it's said to make terrifying things happen. Two collectors bought the doll from a dealer who really seemed like he just wanted the thing off his hands. He practically gave it to them for free, and it became pretty clear why. In the days that followed, the two collectors would wake up having had these awful nightmares, some of the worst, most vivid nightmares in their life. On top of that, they'd find scratch marks on their bodies that just got worse and worse the longer they had the doll. So they took the thing to Ed and Lorraine Warren, who confirmed that there was some malevolent force linked to the doll, a force that connects with people through their dreams. The doll was safely housed at the Warren Occult Museum, but that's closed now, so who knows where the doll of shadows could be lurking now.
Next up, we've got the Koh-i-Noor diamond, which currently holds the title of the 90th largest diamond in the world, sitting at 105.6 carats or 21.12 grams. Imagine that on your finger. Although it's believed to have weighed as much as 793 carats before it was first cut. While its origins are disputed and ultimately unknown, what is known is that prior to reaching England at a weight of 186 carats, the diamond made its way through Europe, causing the death of any man who dared to don the jewel. One owner was killed while in Iran, another was imprisoned, and another watched 3 of his brothers die. Somehow, however, women didn't seem to be affected by the stone, and so by the time it had reached the UK, it was believed that the curse only affected the men who wore it, a belief which the Brits took very seriously. To this day, the imperfect diamond, which was cut to increase its brilliance when it arrived to the British monarchy, has only ever been worn by women, including the late Queen Elizabeth herself.
Reddit user BrilliantTackle5408 shared a story about a beautiful Victorian-era mirror they inherited from their grandmother, who had just recently passed away, a mirror that they quickly learned had a dark energy attached to it. At first they thought everything was normal when they hung the vintage mirror in their bedroom, but soon they started seeing strange shapes and figures in its reflection. Brilliant Tackle even heard faint whispers at night, at first thinking it was just old house noises, but the whispers got clear, even hearing their grandmother's voice at one point. And one night they were organizing some old family photos and glanced at the mirror, and there in the reflection was their grandmother standing right behind them, her eyes empty and hollow, her grin stretched impossibly wide. They moved the mirror to the basement immediately, hoping to stop the disturbances, but the whispers would persist.
And finally, we have the La Peregrina Pearl, which is beautiful, but unfortunately out of my price range. Also, it's cursed. The pearl was originally discovered by a slave off of the Gulf of Panama before it made its way into the Spanish Royal Crown's collection of jewels, after which the King of Spain, Philip II, sent the pearl to England as a gift for his future wife, Mary I. Mary was a devout Catholic with an incredibly high fondness for the prosecution of Protestants. During her rule, over 280 Protestants were burned at the stake in accordance with her orders, every one of which she bore witness to while wearing the La Peregrina Pearl, which is what ultimately resulted in her earning the nickname Bloody Mary. When she died at the age of 42, the pearl was returned to Spain, where it made its way through various members of the Spanish royal family, leaving behind a wake of misfortune. Husbands and wives committing adultery with members of their own families, killings, and mysterious illnesses were common afflictions among those who possessed the pearl, which now is under private, undisclosed ownership.
Number 5. the house itself. The mansion housing the museum has reportedly been haunted for years. It was built in 1938 and owned by businessman Cyril S. Wenger, and rumor has it, dark rituals took place in the basement in the 1970s. There was a pentagram found in the basement, and this is where supposedly a young boy was sacrificed. It is some kind of satanic altar supposedly to invoke the spirits down there, and it's an extremely evil place in the house. During the tour, they try to usher people through the basement as quickly as possible because it's so scary. Now, the mansion at one point was turned into a law firm where strange occurrences continued before the place was purchased by Zach and was eventually converted into Zach Bagans' The Haunted Museum. Number 4. Bela Lugosi Mirror. Hollywood star and Dracula actor Bela Lugosi is one of the world's most famous horror actors, but did you know that he once owned a mirror believed to be haunted? It is reported that he was obsessed with practicing a form of clairvoyance, which would involve him staring into inanimate objects to try and conjure messages from spirits. One such object reportedly used by the actor for such practice was a mirror, which hung in Bela's Hollywood Hills home. Zach was given the mirror by the niece of lawyer and B-movie producer Frank Saltry, who formerly lived in the home once owned by Bela. However, Frank tragically died at the home in 1982, and following his death, the producer's family inherited the mirror. Soon after bringing the mirror home though, the family began to notice that paranormal activity began to occur in their own home. Believing Bella's own practices and her uncle's death to have affected the mirror, she later took the object to paranormal investigator Zach. After taking the mirror from Frank's niece, the star also encountered his own paranormal experiences around the mirror when he investigated his own museum for a 2017 episode of Ghost Adventures. This included seeing a ball of light that appeared on the opposite wall of the mirror, which Zach said traveled across the room and went inside the mirror. Now that sounds extremely haunted to me. Number 3. Ed Gein Cauldron. Ed Gein ended the lives of people and was a grave robber. He created costumes, furniture, and other keepsakes from the bodies of his victims. A police raid on his house turned up masks literally made from human faces, a belt of nipples, and a corset created from a skin torso. To be clear, he never wore these costumes when ending people's lives. Instead, he donned them in the privacy of his home. Now, some masks appeared to be mummified, almost dried out, while others were more carefully preserved. A few had lipstick applied and looked more lifelike, and 4 had been stuffed with paper and hung on the wall of his bedroom, almost like hunting trophies. Leatherface from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Buffalo Bill from The Silence of the Lambs, and Norman Bates were all based on Ed. Zach paid $2,800 at an auction to take possession of the 25-gallon cauldron Ed used to discard his victims' entrails when he gutted them. The thing had been sitting in a Wisconsin woman's home, used as a flower pot ever since Ed's 1984 death in prison. When she died, her son wisely believed the cauldron was cursed and wanted it gone, so now it's Zach's. Number 2. Peggy the Doll. Warning, looking into this doll's eyes can cause you to have health issues or even get haunted. Please watch at your own risk. Now, Peggy the Doll is a 3-foot tall doll that has a blonde hair bob with glassy blue eyes and is considered to be the most haunted and dangerous doll in the world. After being purchased at a car boot sale, the owner began having nightmares and felt as though she was being haunted by the doll. She contacted Jane Harris, a paranormal and haunted doll investigator, and eventually sent the doll to her. Jane and her team of psychics began working with the doll, running experiments, or having paranormal sessions with it, and began posting photos and videos of the doll online. That is when she began to receive comments from people who had seen the video, and immediately after viewing began to have chest pain, nausea, and or crippling headaches. So yes, she can haunt you through a screen. Jane has come to the conclusion that the doll is possessed by the spirit of a woman who was born in 1946 who died of a chest-related condition like asthma. Now, Peggy's picture alone is said to cause anxiety, heart attacks, and headaches. Now, Peggy is treated with extreme respect in the museum. She has her own room and a spirit box which is linked up to the room so guests can interact with her if they wish. Many guests have received very strange feedback through the spirit box, including being called out by name and conscious replies to certain questions asked on her guided tours. Now, looking up information about Peggy was absolutely terrifying, and Peggy, if I accidentally looked into your eyes, I am so Sorry. And coming in at number 1 is the Devil's Chair. Ed and Lorraine Warren helped exorcise a possessed boy named David Glatzel in the early 80s. They did many exorcisms on David, and Lorraine said that David levitated, ceased breathing for a time, and even demonstrated the supernatural ability of precognition. During his exorcisms, there was also a rocking chair in the room that would allegedly rock on its own, levitate, and even vanish and reappear. David and Lorraine also claimed to have seen the devil sitting in it. Now, Zach purchased the chair to be on display in his museum, but he had been forced to shut down his haunted rocking chair exhibit. Why? Well, Zach and his friend noticed the door to the chair's room slowly creaked open all by itself. Zach also says a light focused on the chair went out when a power cord was mysteriously yanked out of the wall. 2 hours later, he said a woman collapsed, began bawling, and asked, "What is happening to me?" Shortly thereafter, she fell unconscious, according to Zach, who adds that the woman was upstairs directly above the rocking chair exhibit. Later, Zach said 5 of his tour guides throughout the museum started crying uncontrollably. After just a few tours on opening night, the stress was too much for Zach and it forced him to shut it down altogether for the night. For now, Zach says the haunted rocking chair exhibit is closed until further notice, but in the middle of 2022, YouTubers Sam and Colby, who are paranormal investigators that I love, by the way, were given special permission to not only see or touch the chair, but to sit on it. The results were insane, and let me just say they are braver than me, because wow.
Coming in at number 5 is Annabelle. Okay, I know we're all pretty aware of the cursed demon doll, but I just couldn't help it. I mean, she is one of the most terrifying things you can find in a museum after all. Although nowadays she's locked up tight in the famous paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren's occult museum, this wasn't always the case. Back in 1970, Annabelle was gifted to a nursing student named Donna, but it didn't take long before Donna and her roommate Angie knew that something was off. After about a month, the roommates began finding disturbing messages lying around their apartment, warning them to help Lou. Lou was one of their friends who had apparently warned the girls of the doll since day one. Eventually, things got so creepy that the women contacted a medium who told them to not be afraid, that the doll was merely possessed by a young girl named Annabelle Higgins, who had died on the property years prior. The medium advised them that Annabelle felt really safe here and would like to stay, so they agreed. But that was all part of the demon's plan. Not long after, Lou stayed over, and when he awoke from a nightmare, he found he couldn't move his body. And then, like straight out of a horror movie, he says Annabelle walked up his body and strangled him until he passed out. After that, the girls contacted a priest who put them in touch with the paranormal investigators, Ed and Lorraine Warren, who discredited the medium and said it was, in fact, a dangerous demon possessing the doll. However, even now, despite being locked up, the doll should be deeply feared. It was reported one man who visited the museum mocked the doll and only a few days later died after losing control of his motorbike. Next up at number 4, the Hands Resist Him painting. As far as paintings go, the Hands Resist Him, created by William Stoneham in 1972, is probably considered one of the most haunted pieces in the whole world. Stoneham claims the inspiration for the piece came from an old photograph from his early years, and somehow, over time, the painting landed in the hands of a California couple. As the story goes, the sellers who auctioned it on eBay in 2000 kept the painting in their 4-year-old's room. But one morning, the girl claimed that the people in the painting were not letting her sleep at night. So, for the girl's peace of mind, they set up a motion sensor camera to prove that no monsters were coming out of the painting. However, to their surprise, they captured some truly frightening activity. They awoke to find photos of the boy crawling from the painting, and others where the doll's face had changed to a very angry disposition while holding a weapon. Not only that, it's also rumored to have been responsible for the death of 3 men who came into contact with it at one time or another. Today, you can find it in the back room of Smith's Perception Fine Art Gallery in Grand Rapids, Michigan. But be warned, those that witness the painting often complain of nausea or extreme physical pain while in its presence. Coming in at number 3, Ed Gein's Cauldron.
So, a little backstory. Ed Gein, aka the Butcher of Plainfield, was a killer and body snatcher between 1947 to 1957. Gein grew up very religious. His mother was a devout Lutheran who taught her sons that women were inherently promiscuous and instruments of the devil. Gein became very attached to his mother, arguably a little too much, and after his father and brother both died, Gein became his mother's primary caregiver. However, after she died in 1945, something snapped and he became a totally different person. He began to visit the graveyards at night, digging up middle-aged women that had similarities to his deceased mother, before bringing the bodies home and mutilating them, using their skin to make covers for his furniture, masks out of their faces, or using the bones for decoration and dishes. Even creepier was when he began creating an entire woman's suit from various different exhumed bodies, as he wanted to be able to become his mother and literally be in her skin. It is believed that this cauldron was used by Gein to not only store the stolen body parts, but primarily to boil them so that the skin could be removed from the bone more easily. Nowadays, this cursed cauldron is found at the haunted Zach Baggin Museum and is definitely one of the most terrifying things found inside. Next up at number 2, Peter Curtin's head. Inside the Ripley's Believe It or Not Museum in Wisconsin is one of the most haunting objects you could come across: the severed head of a dead man. But who's the guy? Well, none other than the vampire of Dusseldorf, Peter Curtin. To give you a bit of context, Peter Curtin is widely considered one of the most cruel, sick, and deranged men of the 20th century. Between 1913 to 1929, he was a rampant killer and predator, responsible for the death of 10 people, on top of another 31 attempted killings among his 68 crimes total. While in court, he received the nickname Vampire of Dusseldorf for reasons I'm sure you can imagine, and after freely confessing to all his crimes with no remorse for his cruelties, he was sentenced to execution via the guillotine. But his atrocities did not end there. In fact, shortly before he was executed, he famously turned to his psychiatrist and asked, quote, "Tell me, after my head is chopped off, will I still be able to hear, at least for a moment, the sound of my own blood gushing from the stump of my neck? That would be the pleasure to end all pleasures." Following his beheading, his head was then bisected and his brain was removed in order to be studied. The rest of his head, however, was mummified, transferred to the United States, and put on display for the world to see. And last up today in the number 1 spot, Nabrok. In 17th century Iceland, there was a well-known witchcraft ritual where people would create pants out of the skin of the deceased in hopes of a better life for them and their families moving forward. Called Nabrok, meaning corpse breeches, or more commonly referred to as necropants nowadays, the pants were made as a talisman to magically summon more money for whoever made them. However, there was a catch. The man in question had to have consented before death, and the deed could only be done after the burial had taken place. Once loved ones said their goodbyes, you were free to dig up the corpses and peel off the skin, being careful to keep it all in one piece. It was believed that no holes or tears could occur, otherwise the power of the necropants would be lost. But disgustingly, it didn't stop there. Once you had fashioned the pants and put them on your person, the ritual demanded you head out into the village and steal 1 coin from a destitute widow. From there, the coin was to be placed in the groin of the pants, along with a traditional Icelandic sigil for the ritual to be complete. There is only one known pair of such pants remaining today, and it's held in the Museum of Icelandic Sorcery and Witchcraft. And if you ask me, they are just about the most terrifying thing that I can think of.
A demonic dog is said to stalk a small stone church in the small mountain town of Valley Crucis in Watauga County, North Carolina. If you stop just off Highway 194 at the edge of town, you'll find an old church, and in the churchyard cemetery, if you're driving at night, you may be lucky enough, or rather unlucky enough, to come across a demonic creature known as the demon dog of Valley Crucis, a beast who lurks in the shadows of the old churchyard. Best case scenario, he'll just scare you away. Worst case scenario, you'll have found your final resting place. The story goes that two friends were out for a drive one night along the highway near the old church. The night was eerily quiet, but they were chatting away, not expecting anything out of the ordinary. But as they rounded a sharp corner, a dark figure suddenly jumped out from behind one of the old gravestones, landing right in front of the car. They slammed on the brakes and swerved onto the narrow shoulder of the road. They caught their breaths, slowly turning their necks to see what they'd almost hit. It looked to be a dog, but not a normal dog. This thing was as big as a full-grown man. Its fur was jet black and sticking up. Its teeth were bright yellow and impossibly sharp. And then there were its eyes, glowing bright, fiery red. The friends watched in horror as the beast started to move toward their car, and the driver slammed his foot on the gas, roaring down the road at top speed. There was no way this thing could have caught up with them. But when they glanced in the rearview mirror, their hearts sank. The dog was still behind them, and not only was it keeping up with them, it was closing the gap. The driver pressed the accelerator to the floor. They flew toward a bridge that crossed a small stream where two waters met. Just as the monstrous dog was about to reach them, though, it stopped, right as the car made it over the bridge. Valley Crucis is Latin for Valley of the Cross, where these two rivers meet, creating this kind of cross-like formation. Not ideal for a hound from the pits of hell.
In the small town of Cumberland, Rhode Island, a man known as Fingernail Freddy once lived peacefully until one day he got into an argument with a group of young people trespassing on his property. In the heat of the argument, he fired a round of rock salt at the group, who then left the scene. Freddy assumed that would be the end of it, but unfortunately for everyone involved, it was not. Apparently, in the dead of night, the group of trespassers snuck back onto Freddy's land and set his house ablaze. The fire claimed the lives of Freddy's wife as well as his sons and daughters, and Freddy himself suffered from extensive long-lasting injuries as well. After the ordeal, it is said that Freddy retreated into the woods where he stopped grooming and started plotting his revenge. At the end of his life, his fingernails had grown incredibly long and his soul had become incredibly dark. Many locals believe that after his death, Fingernail Freddy became some kind of demon that now haunts the town, scratching on the doors and windows of unruly individuals who remind him of the ones that ruined his life and destroyed his family.
Skinned Tom is an entity said to be just as grotesque looking as he sounds. He has no skin and his organs are exposed, still pulsating as if alive. If you find yourself on a date in Rogersville, Tennessee, you may want to avoid driving to any lover's lanes. Rather than your typical tale of a killer with a hook for a hand, you may run into a skinless undead monstrosity named Skinned Tom, who gets irrationally enraged when he sees couples making out in parked cars, as most, serial killers of his ilk do. The tale goes that there was once a handsome guy named Tom, known for his charm and good looks. He had a knack for getting into relationships with women who were already married. And one night, while parked at a secluded lover's lane with someone else's wife, Tom found himself face to face with the woman's furious husband, a very furious husband. The enraged man decided to make Tom suffer. He beat him before skinning him alive. And Tom, rather than, taking his anger out on the husband, was left with a burning hatred of all couples, especially the women. And ever since that night, his restless spirit is said to roam, never to find peace until he tracks down the woman who watched him die, while, of course, slaying every innocent couple he sees on his way.
The legend of the Beast of Bladenboro, said to haunt the small town of Bladenboro in North Carolina, dates all the way back to the 1950s, during which time it is said that the town was held hostage by a large cat-like vampiric beast for almost a week. In total, this beast claimed the lives of 8 dogs, a family of cats, 1 lamb, and even a few villagers. After the ordeal, word got around to the neighboring villages and hunters started spilling into the small town, eager to catch a glimpse of the beast and even more eager to kill it. At the height of the panic, almost 1,000 hunters had traveled to the small town of Bladenboro, and in the end, an 11.5 kilogram, 25-pound bobcat was presented to the villagers, who were quick to believe their troubles had ended. Unfortunately, that was not the case, as rumblings and sightings of the massive beast are still reported in the area to this day.
New Orleans is absolutely full of spooky urban legends, one of which is the tale of the Devil Man, who is said to once stalk the city's Algiers neighborhood. Sightings of a horned humanoid creature with chicken eyes and long pointy ears started being reported in 1938. And as silly as this description sounds, people were actually pretty terrified at the time. See, this was about 20 years after the infamous unsolved case of the Axeman, a very real serial killer who terrorized the people of New Orleans between May of 1918 and October of 1919, before vanishing just as suddenly as he'd appeared. In an infamous letter written in March of 1919, the Axeman had described himself as a sort of supernatural demonic entity, and added to the fact that he was never caught, it actually got people kind of questioning. So when multiple people from the same neighborhood began telling stories of a horned demon monster running through the streets at night, saying mean things to women and trashing bars, it really didn't seem all that far-fetched, especially because this thing seemed to be more, of a trickster, rather than a man hell-bent on just straight up killing you. So it was like, why not believe it?
This next demon is probably my absolute least favorite, because if you blink you might miss it, and it might kill you. It's the Blink Man, also known as the Peeping Tom of Ellicott City, Maryland, a demonic entity believed to haunt a tunnel located in the town. No one really knows how he came to be, but they do know to steer clear of staring down the tunnel at night if they want to avoid any kind of run-in with an early death. Although, I suppose it's not that bad when you take into consideration that one must follow a very specific set of rules in order to come face to face with the infamous demon. Rules that involve staring down the tunnel for an entire hour from midnight till 1 a.m. When that clock strikes 1 a.m., it's reported that the Blink Man will appear in your vision, and that every time you blink, he will appear closer and closer and closer until eventually he's standing right in front of you, ready to end your life and eat your flesh.
In Iowa City, you'll find a grave marker known as the Black Angel. It was built in 1913 and stands in the Oakland Cemetery. This 8.5-foot tall sculpture wasn't always black. It used to be a shiny bronze, but over time it turned dark, giving it the creepy appearance that it has today. And there are tons of legends about what might have caused it. Some people believe it's a sign of a curse, while others say it's because of all the sins of the people buried beneath it. One of the most popular legends says that anyone who touches or kisses the statue at midnight will die within a year. It's said that the angel's black color is a warning, and anyone who ignores it is doomed. And if you're ever visiting and happen to be superstitious and pregnant, you might want to avoid walking under the wings. It's said you'll miscarry. There are also tales of ghostly apparitions and strange occurrences around the statue. People have reported feeling this overwhelming sense of dread as they approach it, and some claim to have seen glowing eyes in the angel's face at night. Others say they've heard whispers or felt cold spots in the air, as if the statue is watching and judging those who come near.
It has been said that a demon reigns over Utah's Escalante Petrified Forest State Park. Furthermore, the demon is said to curse anyone who is stupid enough not to A, obey the law, and B, heed the warnings of the locals and go ahead and remove a piece of petrified wood from its forest home. While there is quite a hefty fine for those who get caught attempting to make off with unlawful souvenirs foraged from the area, the supernatural consequences tend to be far worse. Because of this, from as far back as the 1930s, the park has received a steady stream of packages containing both both the pieces of stolen petrified wood and letters from the people who stole them, begging park rangers to put those pieces back where they came from. Many of these letters also include personal accounts of the terrible things that have happened to the thieves since removing the pieces, with some people claiming to have gone broke, experienced medical complications, and occasionally deaths have occurred as well. Apparently though, besides the curse, the forest is really beautiful, but if I were you, I'd wait and grab the souvenir from the gift shop. Next up, we have the St. Louis Ghost Train of Saskatchewan, Canada. The train is somewhat of a legend in St. Louis. Not only is it a ghost train, but it runs along ghost tracks. And some locals claim to have seen the lights and heard the sounds of the train at least 50 to 60 times in their life. At one time, the train and the tracks were very real, but both have since been removed from the town. The most popular explanation given by locals for the removal of the train and the tracks is that one night a Canadian National Railway conductor was out examining the train tracks when a train came rushing by and took his head clean off, which is why sometimes the ghostly light of this phantom train shines a bright, deep red. Those who have seen the light describe it as prominent and strong, creeping slowly down the lines of where the old tracks used to be before completely disappearing into the bushes.
The Lincoln funeral train is one of America's most famous ghost train legends. So after President Abraham Lincoln was killed in 1865, a funeral train carried his body on a long journey from Washington, D.C. to Springfield, Illinois, where he was to be buried. The train traveled 1,654 miles and stopped in several cities along the way so that people could pay their respects. The train was draped in black cloth and a mourning crepe. It was an ominous reminder of a sad event in a very dark time in American history. Now the legend goes, though, that on the anniversary of Lincoln's death, the funeral train returns. People say they've seen this eerie train moving silently along the tracks, pulled by a locomotive covered in black and lit by dim, flickering lanterns. Some stories also mention phantom mourners standing by the train and the sound of bells tolling softly in the distance.
Next up, we have the Bostain Bridge Ghost Train located in Iredell County in North Carolina. The ghost of a real train that on August 27th of 1891 was involved in a fatal railway accident that cost the lives of 23 people. The train had been behind schedule, and so the conductor began picking up speed in an effort to catch up on the delay. But instead of making it on time to the next stop, the train derailed and went flying off the bridge. Now, if that's not enough tragedy for you, in 2010, 119 years later, on the exact day of the incident, a person was killed by a train on that very same bridge. People in the town who frequent the area surrounding the bridge where the tragedy occurred have reported various incidents of the ghost train making its way along the tracks, accompanied by the sounds of moaning and wounded passengers who would have either perished or been badly injured in the incident that gave the bridge its infamy.
Baton Rouge, Louisiana is home to Frenchtown Road, a creepy road that's said to be haunted by ghosts, devil worship, and yes, a phantom train. Running across a section of the wooded road is an old bridge where trains used to pass. This is where most of the paranormal stuff happens. The story goes that back in the day, a train derailed, killing everyone on board, and to this day, on some nights, people can hear the ghostly sounds of a train chugging by, along with phantom whistles. Some will even swear they can see the lights of an oncoming train, which never comes. There have also been sightings of ghostly passengers lurking around the tracks. Another story goes that a school bus had been hit by a train, killing all the youngsters inside, but there's not a whole lot of credible information on that. Along with the phantom train, though, this section of Frenchtown Road is also famous for the creepy cultish activity. People have reported hearing the sounds of chanting coming from the surrounding forest, and satanic symbols are constantly being graffitied on the bridge, which has led to rumors about satanic rituals taking place. Is it just people fooling around, or is there something else going on?
Next up, we have the Republic Ghost Train. Like the Boston Bridge train, the Republic Ghost Train is the ghost of a very real train that was involved in a very real accident. On January 4th of 1887, an eastbound freight train and a westbound passenger train met head-on on the tracks of Seneca County at alarming speeds. When the trains collided, they were going so fast that their fronts were momentarily lifted off of the tracks before they both came crashing down and began to burn. Flames erupted from the smoker car and soon engulfed the train almost entirely. It is estimated that 22 people died that day, but the true death count remains unknown. Luckily for some, an unknown passenger was able to detach the sleeper car located at the back of the train and save them from being affected by the flames. Although it's been over a century since the accident, many people in the town still claim to see the train making its way over the bridge in the dark of night.
So far, we've only talked about ghost trains on this list, but we're gonna finish off with one that may not be cursed in the traditional sense, but would definitely transport you to a hellish place. The Soviet Union's system of forced labor camps were known as the Gulag. These were not places you wanted to be, but if you were a political descendant or a criminal or perceived enemy of the government in any way, you could land yourself on a train to some remote area to spend your days in a labor camp. Prisoners were crowded into cramped and unsanitary cattle cars with little food or water for the long journeys that could last for weeks or even months. Many prisoners suffered from malnutrition, disease before even arriving at the camps, and once they were there, they committed to grueling labor, often in extreme weather. Many prisoners did not survive the harsh conditions of the Gulag camps, and those who did would suffer with physical and psychological scars for the rest of their lives.
Coming in at number 5, Pearls of Death. While it's probably a pretty safe blanket rule that you shouldn't go around touching much of anything you find in Ed and Lorraine's demonic collection, some stuff is probably a little worse than others, and this next one falls into the latter category. Notoriously one of the most dangerous items found inside the museum, the Pearls of Death is a cursed necklace said to do exactly as the name suggests. Allegedly, anyone who dares place them around their neck will be choked and suffocated to death. Now, my question about this necklace is it like a Frodo and the Ring style situation where it will call to you, slowly infecting your brain through mind control until it practically forces you to place it around your neck? Or does it just wait for someone to unknowingly do it before it unleashes all hell on the victim? I guess I will never know, because you can bet I won't be testing it out for myself. Coming in at number 4, the Conjuring Mirror. Despite what the name would have you believe, the Conjuring Mirror actually has really nothing to do with the Conjuring movies. Instead, this haunted mirror gets its name from the fact that it was, at one point, allegedly used to summon or conjure spirits. Once in the possession of a man named Stephen Zellner, legend has it that Stephen practiced a kind of witchcraft known as catoprotromancy, I probably butchered that, in order to see into the future and seek out revenge on his enemies. However, the more that Stephen used the mirror, the more and more corrupt he and his use of the magic became. Eventually, it's said the evil spirits he had conjured to do his bidding became too powerful to control and turned on the very person who had summoned them. Soon, Stephen began fearing for his life, so as a last resort, he decided to reach out to a local priest to see if the evil spirits could be exorcised from the home. But instead, the priest put him in touch with Ed and Lorraine. Upon their arrival at Stephen's home, they immediately knew Stephen was in grave trouble. And so to keep him safe, they performed a reverse incantation spell to seal up all the spirits back inside the mirror from which they had been conjured. Afterwards, Stephen begged them to take the mirror away from him, and that is how it came to live in Ed and Lorraine's museum. However, don't get too comfortable. Despite the spell they cast, Ed and Lorraine still claim to have experienced many terrifying moments with the spirits they angered from trapping inside this mirror. And who knows what could bring them back out. Coming in at number 3, the Shadow Doll. When it comes to creepy dolls, I'll be honest, it doesn't take much to freak me out. But with that being said, there is definitely a very good reason why the shadow doll is one of the most feared possessions in the entire museum. Now, what starts off this seemingly endless list of creepy things about this doll is that there is no definitive answer as to why it was created or who created it. But according to Ed and Lorraine's files, it was made using both human and animal bones and was absolutely used in satanic rituals. So it is definitely possessed by some less than ideal company. Said to have been found in an antique shop by a couple, they began to think something was wrong after they kept waking up night after night covered in inexplicable scratches. But it wasn't until the doll began showing up in their nightmares, telling them that she was going to kill them, that they decided to get rid of the terrifying toy. And good thing they did too. Legend has it that if someone takes a picture of this doll, she will visit you in your dreams and kill you in your sleep. Just one more reason to never trust a creepy doll. Coming in at number 2, a satanic idol. As the story goes, in 1991, a hunter was walking through the woods on the lookout for deer when he began to feel an overwhelming sense of paranoia, like he was being watched or something. At that very moment, he turned around to see this creepy doll leaned up against a tree, staring at him, and he could have sworn that it appeared out of nowhere. Immediately, the hunter knew he should not be here, and so he began walking as quickly as he could to find a way out of the forest. Then, suddenly, an old man dressed in all black robes appeared beside him. He looked like a priest, the hunter thought, but something wasn't quite right. Every step he took, the priest matched him, and eventually he became so freaked out, he actually debated shooting at the priest with his arrow to scare him off. But instead, he decided to ask the priest how to get out of the forest. But creepily, the priest did not speak. Instead, he pointed off into another direction, turned around, and left the man alone once again. Now, luckily, the hunter escaped, and the following day, after telling his friends the strange events, they suggested that he reach out to Ed and Lorraine. Upon telling them his story, they explained that the priest was a well-known leader of a satanic cult, and that the creepy doll he had encountered was actually an idol used for ritual purposes. However, the Warrens, being who they were, wanted to get this idol for the museum, and so Ed ventured into the forest, found the doll, and brought it back home. Soon after, however, strange things began happening. Allegedly, one time Ed was speaking with Lorraine, turned away for a second, looked back, and she was suddenly 30 feet away and passed out on the ground. He called the ambulance, and she spent the next 3 days in hospital in and out of consciousness. And according to Ed, she actually levitated while in the hospital. The Warrens always firmly believed that the satanic priest was working through the doll Ed had taken from the forest and was trying to punish them for taking it. Let's just hope no one was ever hospitalized after that. And last up in our number 1 spot, Annabelle. You didn't really think I was gonna do a list about haunted things found in Ed and Lorraine's museum and not bring up the famous Annabelle, did you? Although nowadays she is locked up tight, this wasn't always the case. Back in 1970, Annabelle was gifted to a nursing student named Donna. But it didn't take long before Donna and her roommate Angie knew that something was off. After about a month, the roommates began finding disturbing messages lying around their apartment, warning them to help Lou. Lou was one of their friends who had apparently warned the girls of the doll since day 1. Eventually, things got so creepy that the woman contacted a medium who told them not to be afraid, that the doll was merely possessed by a young girl named Annabelle Higgins who had died on the property years prior. The medium advised them that Annabelle felt safe here and would like to stay, so they agreed. But that was all a part of the demon's plan. Not long after, Lou stayed over, and when he awoke from a nightmare, he found he couldn't move his body. And then, like straight out of a horror movie, he says Annabelle walked up his body and strangled him until he passed out. After that, the girls contacted a priest who put them in touch with paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren, who discredited the medium and said it was, in fact, a very dangerous demon possessing this doll. However, even now, despite being locked up, the doll should be deeply feared. It was reported once that a man who visited the museum mocked the doll and only a few days later died after losing control of his motorbike. So, yeah, she very well could be the most terrifying doll on the planet.
Looking at this puppet, would you ever think twice about sleeping in the same room with it? It looks pretty innocuous, right? Well, according to paranormal investigator Jane Harris from Stourbridge, West Midlands, that wouldn't be advised. She'd acquired the doll from a guy named John who claimed that the wooden puppet tried to choke him in the middle of the night. So Harris decided to keep a camera on the thing throughout the night to try and see if it got up to any mischief. Well, one night, it did. On camera, she captured the string with the cross attached, which operates the puppet, slowly moving upright on its own before falling back down in the case. Harris stated, "I've never had anything as exciting as this. I've caught pictures of mists, orbs, and shadows, but nothing as physical as this video evidence." The previous owner, John, had grown up with the puppet, which belonged to his father. He said he never liked it either, that it always gave him the creeps, and that whenever friends came to visit, they'd never want to get near it. And then, of course, there's the choking incident. After John's father had died, he was clearing out his belongings, but ended up keeping the puppet, which he left on the drawer by his bed. And that very night, the incident occurred. He said, quote, "I was wide awake in bed and thought I saw a shadow move from one side of the window to the other, and worried something was trying to scare us. Then, without warning, my throat suddenly went really tight. I've never had anyone's hands around my throat before, so it was really scary. I tried to wake my wife, but it took her ages to come around. When she did, I remember looking straight at the puppet sitting on the drawer near our bed and realizing it was him." We've all heard of Robert the Doll. Well, how about a spooky first-hand account? This story comes from Reddit user Sublime Sloth, who posted this story along with a photo. They wrote, "Long story short, friend's sister went to the Robert the Doll exhibit in Key West and didn't believe the curse. Apparently flicked it off and took a photo without asking permission. Started having terrible luck. Photos messed up, eerie feelings of being watched, etc. This photo was taken after a conversation talking about how she felt that Robert was following her and had something to do with her string of bad luck. Someone jokingly took the photo after invoking Robert's name to see what would happen. 100% real and not photoshopped. She immediately wrote a letter apologizing to the doll the next day. Nightmare fuel. Had this photo for years and show it every time the topic of ghosts comes up." I don't know, what do you guys think of this one? Let me know in the comments. Did you get super sick of the movie Frozen 11 years back? God, that was over a decade ago. Well, at least you didn't have to go through what this next family did. In 2013, the Bedonia family in Houston brought an Elsa doll from the movie Frozen for their young daughter. Now, at first, everything was normal. The doll sang and said cute phrases from the movie just like it was supposed to, but then things started getting weird. According to Emily Bedonia, the doll started doing stuff like switching between English and Spanish, and for the next 6 years, the doll never once needed new batteries. Not that it even needed batteries at all, because apparently it would even say things when it was supposed to be off. So naturally the family decided they'd had enough of Elsa and her weird antics, so they decided to let it go. Good old 11-year-old joke. Anyway, they threw it in the trash, but none of this is the creepy part. A few weeks later, they found Elsa in their basement. They tried to get rid of it again, this time by putting it deep at the bottom of the trash bin right before the garbage was collected. Then they took a short trip out of town, thinking the doll was finally gone, but when they got back, Elsa was sitting in the backyard, like she'd never left. Now you'd think someone was just messing with them, but Emily pointed out that the doll had this distinctive mark from their daughter. The doll sitting in the backyard had that very same mark. This is Harold, full name Harold the Haunted Doll. And it's pretty easy to see why. I'd have some serious questions for whatever youngster would ever want to spend time playing with this thing. In 2003, a young man came across Harold at a flea market and felt this immediate urge to buy him for some reason. It was worn and shabby, but the man bargained with the seller and eventually paid $20 for it. But before he could leave, the old man selling the doll stopped him and insisted he hear the doll's eerie backstory. The man revealed that Harold was a gift he'd given to his own son, who tragically died shortly after receiving it. After his son's death, the old man kept Harold in his room, and that's when strange things began to happen. He would hear singing and laughter coming from the room when no one else was around. Frustrated and scared by the constant disturbances, the old man tried to burn the doll, but it wouldn't catch fire. The redditor decided to take the doll home anyway, and things got weird almost immediately. He started experiencing severe migraines, something he had never dealt with before. And a couple days later, his cat died. He began hearing the same voices and laughter that the old man had described as well. But even with all this happening, he decided to keep Harold, but he stuffed him in a suitcase, out of sight, out of mind. And I guess he couldn't burn it, he already knew. But I would have definitely not kept it in a suitcase. I would have driven it out of town and left it in the woods. The Swamp Dolls. It sounds like a great name for a band, but you know, that's not where I'm going with this thing. So in 2014, police in Alabama stumble on a very odd scene in Bear Creek Swamp. They find 21 dolls, most of them antique porcelain, all stuck on bamboo stakes and standing upright in the middle of the swamp. The dolls were discovered on land owned by a timber company, but when the police tried to reach out to the company to get some answers, they never got a response. The police also tried to track down who put the dolls there, but they came up empty-handed. Now, this wouldn't be all that eerie if Bear Creek Swamp didn't already have somewhat of a spooky reputation. People who visit the swamp have reported hearing disembodied voices, seeing strange orbs, and even spotted unidentified creatures. There's also an old legend that says the swamp is haunted by a grieving mother who's endlessly searching for her lost daughter. But believe in ghosts or not, it's hard to deny that finding a bunch of old dolls on stakes in a swamp is kind of unsettling. I do have to wonder what's going on in that town though, because I feel like if I was a cop and I was called to a scene where there were dolls on stakes, I'd be like, I think there's something else probably better I could be doing with my time. Maybe that's just me though. All that said, I've been your host James, and I'll catch you, yes you specifically, in the next video.
Want to see more videos like this one? Check out this video next. It's about real scary stories that will ruin your life. Think we're being facetious? Think again, because these stories have been known to seriously harm people. Seriously, folks. Viewer discretion advised. Click the video now to find out more.